At the moment, well, joining us now is probably the best travelled man I know. He's on a very exotic journey through the Pyrenees. Simon Calder, travel correspondent at The Independent, joins us now. Good morning, Simon.
Oh, well, how lovely to talk to you, David, and also to Charlie, but I'm afraid that is about the biggest bit of spin I've ever heard in favour of Old Oak Common. I've been there.
Thank you.
It's really handy for Wormwood Scrubs prison. It's not a big railway junction. It's a patch of wasteland about 7 miles from Euston Station. And it is absolutely preposterous that we would have this kind of Ryanair approach to a really important bit of infrastructure. We could call it West London Parkway or something, but it's not quite the same as Euston Station. And by the way, anybody who's been near Euston Station over the past few years will know that the whole place is in disarray because they're digging it all up to build the terminal station for HS2. And if you decide, oh, well, we're not going to bother with that anymore, what are you going to do about the ferocious mess there? They've already paused it, which is going to cost us hundreds of millions of pounds just to stop doing the work on Euston for a while they decide what sort of station they want. And the Prime Minister's refusal yesterday to say if HS2 would be extended is just utterly outrageous. It's less than 2 years since we had an integrated rail plan launched by then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and then Transport Secretary Grant Shapps saying, yep, we're not going to build the whole of HS2, we're going to do the vast majority of it and it's going to be great, and Northern Powerhouse Rail. And by Sunday he was saying, oh yeah, COVID, yeah, we don't know if we can do that now. And yet it was right in the depths of the COVID crisis that his integrated rail plan came out, and it's now disintegrating very quickly, along with the hopes and dreams of people in the North and Midlands that they might have something like decent transport.
And Simon, Boris Johnson told Times Radio he believed that HS2 should never have gone ahead. This is a man who changes his mind more times than Keir Starmer.
Well, sure, yeah, but it's a Labour Party project that was actually taken forward by the coalition and David Cameron's government, by the many prime ministers we've had since then. And now Rishi Sunak, who really doesn't have time for the railways, literally, that's why he's always on helicopters going to Southampton and things. He's just looking at it and thinking, well, the trains are all on strike all the time anyway, why should we bother? And just as a reminder, 9 days of disruption begins today, an overtime ban by members of the ASLEF union. We've got national rail strikes tomorrow and next Wednesday. They're deliberately targeting the Tory party conference in Manchester. And then if you're on the tubes in London, well, there aren't going to be any next Wednesday or the following Friday. Apart from that, it's all going tremendously well. And I'm very glad I'm here in the beautiful French Pyrenees.
Well, this is the point I made, Simon. The fact is that we have the railways. All of these numbers were predicated before COVID. You've also got the unions staging this strike, which is deeply political. I don't think is acceptable. Meanwhile, the same unions are saying they want a meeting with Rishi Sunak over HS2. Well, you can't have both.
No, I mean, to be fair, I've been talking to the train drivers union, and Mick Whelan is furious. He says, you want to give us a 20% pay cut and take away all our terms and conditions. You are destroying the railways. The government completely rejects that, and they said we spent £31 billion protecting every job in the rail industry during COVID. Now we've got to talk about reforms. The unions say, oh, look, passenger numbers are coming back. The government says, well, actually, a lot of that is because so many people are on the Elizabeth line, which you might remember, since we're talking about great infrastructure projects, was the one which came in several years late and woefully over budget, but it's not nearly as much of a disaster as HS2.
And the Elizabeth line is a triumph of engineering. I'm a great fan of the Elizabeth line, as you said, though massively over budget and massively late. Now, also, just in terms of the Rail Delivery Group and what ASLEF is saying, the Rail Delivery Group says the offer they've put forward, which is 4% plus 4%, 8% in total over 2 years, say the average driver's salary is £60,000 to £65,000. Now, for most people in this country, that's a lot of money.
Well, it is, but the train drivers are being very, very good and strong and getting what they want. They have the power to shut down the railways, as we will see tomorrow and next Wednesday. The vast majority of journeys in England will be cancelled, and they are going to use their industrial muscle. Mick Whelan, General Secretary, said he thinks there might not be a settlement until we have a change of government.
I mean, so essentially this is now turning into a massive political argument over railways. If you're going to build an infrastructure project, then you need actually people to drive the trains. Otherwise, there's no point. I mean, it's also interesting that there was an aide, Andrew Gilligan, who is advising Rishi Sunak, saying that essentially it was the greatest infrastructure mistake in half a century. We heard earlier that actually it was all done by computers and modelling. No one actually, they sat down with a map and thought, oh, it would be a jolly good idea if we went from here to here. And so therefore no one, there was no consideration of what this line does, who it serves, and now yet again the public are paying for it.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's going to go down in history as one of the most botched great projects anywhere. The fact that they're now even looking at, well, what do we do about Euston Station is absolutely preposterous. Every time they change their minds, it adds time. It costs billions for the public, and I'm afraid you either build the whole lot or you give up. But
I was about to ask you what you would do. I think both Charlie and I probably agree with you. You do the whole thing or you don't bother.
Yeah, and you've got to really do the whole thing. Otherwise, you just turn what they've done so far at the cost of 30 or 40 billion pounds into one of those nice cycle networks going through the children's.
And in fact, there are other proposals there about turning it into infrastructure or running electricity cables through it or something, or repurposing in some way. I mean, Charlie did put a good spin, very good political spin on Old Oak Common. I actually looked it up yesterday, couldn't find it, and then Rishi Sunak was saying, well, you've got great connections to the Elizabeth line. What is the point of being on a railway, then trumping across grassland to then join the Elizabeth line, which probably takes you longer than on existing rail network?
Oh, sure. Look, it'll actually be handy if you're heading for Heathrow Airport or for Canary Wharf, actually. But if you want to get to central London, and most people do, and plug into the tube network, it's going to be absolutely useless. We already know.
Well, they might argue you can go to Tottenham Court Road on the Elizabeth line. I do know my lines.
You do know your lines, but every other country, every other city has connections going to the heart of them. That's the great thing about railways. They take you to the middle of places, but this, we already know it's going to start off going to and from Old Oak Common, because the government said, yeah, well, we're not going to get Euston ready in time. It's now down to, let's assume there might be a change of government. I think you might accept that, at which point, what is the Labour Party going to do? 9 days ago, they said, yeah, absolutely, we're going to build the whole thing in full and Northern Powerhouse Rail. By last Sunday, they were saying, actually, we don't know. It's an absolute mess. And it's a discredit to everybody involved in this project, I'm afraid.